It's the show where Hawaii's newsmakers come to talk and to take your questions live. From the nation's capital to Honolulu Hale, from the state legislature to the fifth floor. We bring the experts to you and ask them what you want to know. Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Pelesuji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
Aloha, happy Monday. I'm Yanji Denise. Ryan has the day off today, but we continue on, and we've got a great guest this morning on Spotlight Hawaii, live here on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. We are speaking this morning with Paul Brewbaker, economist of TZ Economics, about the health of our state economy, where things are headed. We're going to talk about inflation and interest rates, among other things. So let's get right to it. Paul, thanks for being here this morning.
Thanks for inviting me back, Yanji. We've been doing this a lot lately. Does that mean the economy's in bad shape? Wait a minute.
Well, you're the one who's got to tell me, when you look at how we are overall, when we look at the health of our economy, broad strokes, is Hawaii's economy in a good place?
It's begun to find its footing in the last 6 months or so after a period of uncertainty coming out of the pandemic, but even before the pandemic. And we actually have slides this time. Yanji, should we just punch through them and I'll
Please,
do the...
yes, you call them and I'll send them. So we'll go for the first one here.
Yeah, the first one has a GDP for Hawaii and the US. So it's the total value of production and alternatively incomes, the market value of production of goods and services in the Hawaii economy. And what I've done is I've indexed them both for the US as a whole and then Hawaii just as a state, so that they align in the middle of 2017. And you can see on the upper part of the graphic, the upward rising trend line. That's the kind of a shared trend for Hawaii and the US during the 2010s. I go back to 2009 or 2010 and start the clock running and ask, if the economy had stayed on that track, where would it have ended up today, and where would it be continuing on the same track out in mid-decade? And you can see the path I put in there. The US as a whole is on that path. You can see pretty much running, if not identically on the Hawaii path, in very close parallel. And by the way, it's a parallel with a slope that indicates about a 1.8%, just slightly under a 2% real GDP growth rate. So that's kind of the potential path of the economy, 2% growth per year after inflation. Now, we know inflation's been jumping around. We'll talk about that in concluding here, but that's kind of the benchmark. You get on the escalator, you're cruising along, here comes a pandemic, baboosh, you get knocked off, right? You get knocked off the escalator, and economic recovery means getting back to the escalator. And here's the problem for Hawaii. We veered off that path in the late 2010s prior to the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit. And then after our recovery, we sort of wobbled out here in Hawaii for about a year, 2021, trying to find a footing. And now you see the path that's emerged in the last several quarters. We have new data at the end of last week. Hawaii restoring or returning to that 1.8% path, which I've projected out to 2025. So the good news is Hawaii seems to be back on track. We had confirmation that in the latter part of last year, first quarter of this year, we joined in, but we haven't jumped all the way back to where Hawaii would have been if it had just kept on going. And that's a deeper problem. What happened in 2017?
Well, so why do we have, that 15-point gap there between what's happening nationally and what's happening to us?
For that, we'd have to have another half-hour discussion. But deeply, if you think about it, Hawaii's on the wrong path. So we've made some decisions. And my list, and I realize some of these are controversial, but we dismantle telescopes. We don't build telescopes. We shut down refineries. We don't maintain or increase refining capacity. I mean, we built 3 times as many houses on Oahu in the in the quarter century before I graduated from high school 50 years ago. And for the last 30 years, we've, you know, with computers, we build less than we did when 1/3 as many units. So it's just, it's a sort of, our policies in Hawaii have slowly compressed our economic potential. And then something bad happened in the late 20 teens. If you look at the population numbers, you see it there. People have been leaving Oahu, and by implication, the state as a whole. If you know, the neighbor islands are a little more complicated, but people have been leaving Oahu for 5, 6, 7 years now. We're going to get new estimates of those numbers. I mean, maybe this month. We've been waiting for a few years for the new census to come out and for us to get the revised data for the 20 teens. Why don't we push on to a couple other aspects I can go through more quickly, but GDP summarizes you know, the big picture in an important corner of the economy. Obviously, tourism. People are very interested in the nature of the recovery there. Clearly, you can see the pandemic impact. I think it's also to remember that every one of the subvariants that came along, Alpha, Delta, Omicron, and I would argue even the Omicron subvariants, BA.4, BA.5, more recently the XBB subvariant, express themselves in these tourism indicators. This is a measure called visitor days, which is visitor arrivals times the average stay length. But again, an illustration showing how Hawaii got knocked off the escalator we were on, which in this case was about a 3.5 or 4% annual growth of a real measure of tourism per annum. We got knocked off that path, and the states, I mean, this sector, this export of in Hawaii's economy is struggling to get back and maintain a position that it had pre-pandemic. We've been talking a lot about financial risks, so why don't we look at one aspect of that, what's been going on in interest rates in the next picture. It's a little complicated, but I want people to understand that the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates in order to tamp down inflation, and we'll conclude by looking at Hawaii inflation. But there's another thing going on, which is the risk premium that's an expression of uncertainty and the probability of loan defaults in the financial services sector or in the economy more broadly. And so to highlight this, I'm showing the 30-year fixed rate mortgage rate. The top line, the blue line at the top, is the average 30-year fixed rate mortgage rate nationwide. It was 3% before the pandemic. It was 3% after the pandemic, and about 4% before the pandemic in the late 20 teens. It jumped to 7% as the Fed raised interest rates, and it remains a little bit stuck at or just below 7%. It's probably going to go back to something like 5% over the next couple of years. But meanwhile, the risk-free rate of interest, I'm showing here the yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury note, which currently is about 3 3/4. That gap, which is shown in the blue shaded area on the bottom, the gap between the mortgage rate and the risk-free rate has widened, has increased from about 1 3/4 percentage point to about 3 percentage points. It's widened to a gap that is equal to or in excess of the gap that we saw during the financial crisis in 2008. Now compare that to 1994, which I've highlighted as a parallel with a yellow shading there. That spread did not widen the last time the Fed raised interest rates to tamp down inflation back in the 1990s, and did so without precipitating a recession. That was 1994. The Fed is hoping, by having raised interest rates to tamp down inflation, again to get through without a recession, right? To have a soft landing for the economy. But this large measure of uncertainty or financial risk, or think of it in terms of credit tightening, right? Banks are unwilling to lend as much, is of concern, and is important in the wake of a selected group of commercial banks that failed earlier this year. It's not metastasizing in a contagion-like fashion into a banking crisis as a whole, but it is significant of something, that we got to keep our eyes on. And hopefully that risk premium will burn off as the question over whether there's going to be a recession or not is resolved in the next several quarters. Finally, the underlying driver has been inflation. And I just quickly want to remind everybody, inflation in Hawaii is the same as it was before it went up. It went up for a year, it came down for a year, it's over, stop talking about it, okay? Inflation in the US has come down, but not as fast. And inflation in the US was higher, which, as was the case in the first graphic we looked at in terms of real GDP, the national economy has just been a lot stronger, has gone back to its pre-pandemic trajectory. Hawaii's been weaker for reasons that are idiosyncratically Hawaii it's on us. And that also shows up like a barometric pressure, if you will, with lower inflation, even at the peak, and now a faster return to the pre-pandemic environment. So that's my rundown. I thought, let's get that out of the way, get the graphs out, and now we can do a commercial and come back and have a couple of beers.
Well, that's interesting. I want to go back to a couple of things that you mentioned, but, starting with that last one first, I don't know that people believe that inflation is over. You say it's pow, stop talking about it, but people still feel like everything is more expensive.
Oh, it feels like, yeah, okay, sure. Let's have an emo moment together. It is what it is. The inflation rate in Hawaii is 2%, period. End of story. Actually, ironically, and not to bust on the Star-Advertiser, but I love the headline when the data came out. I showed the most recent data as of 2 weeks ago, I think it is, or is that 1 week ago? Yeah, 2 weeks ago. The headline read something like Hawaii inflation declining, present tense. It's like, no, past tense. It declined last month. It's over. Hawaii inflation declining, and the second line in the header was inflation declining. Oh, and food prices still high. No, but food prices still high. And I was kind of like, no, you know what, Sherlock? It's Hawaii. It's like inflation declining, but home prices are still high. Really? I'm shocked to find that home prices in Hawaii are high. So let's remember what we're talking about. Inflation is the movement of prices over time. That's why all those graphs I have seem to look like escalators, right? It's the movement over time. The speed at which prices in general are rising, currently in Hawaii, or as of last reading in Hawaii, 2% is the same as it was before March 2021, right? Before the last of the fiscal stimuli, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which was at the peak. And so everything that happened, the supply chain disruptions, the price of oil going up after Russia invaded, all that stuff has burned off or have been tamped down by the higher interest rates that the Fed deliberately raised in order to reduce investment demand. And in the case of Hawaii, in particular, the channel through which that has the greatest effect of transmission is residential investment, is the housing market. But be that as it may, the rate at which prices were rising was 2% before. It went up in Hawaii to about, 6.5%, and then it came down and it's 2% again. We're done with the great inflation. Ooh, the inflation. It lasted 2 years. Get over it. Are prices still high? Hell yes, it's Hawaii.
Well, let's talk about something else that's uniquely Hawaii,
let's talk about that. We got to do that. We got to fix that. Okay. Anyway,
let's talk about these tourism numbers, because I think that one of the things that obviously happened with that, you see that huge decline in 2020, that suddenly everyone experienced what Hawaii was without tourism. Obviously the negatives there for the economy and all that came with that. But also having
150,000 people that lost their jobs, those guys.
On the other side, having breathing room, if you will. I don't know how else to phrase it. And so the conversation right now is not let's bring back more tourists. It's how do we bring back less tourists to spend more money? Tell me your thoughts about that.
That's the same conversation as how do we make sure you don't get your job back and don't have an income and need to get the out of here. You know what I mean? That's what that conversation is. Anytime you hear somebody say, oh, we need fewer tourists, they're saying, beat it, get out of here, right? Because that guy's out of a job. Whoever was working to provide goods and services to the 10 million people that came to Hawaii came to visit Hawaii pre-pandemic or whatever the number was, right? That's people who are saying, let's have fewer tourists, are saying, you need to leave. Your job needs to go away and your income needs to be zero. Beat it. So
Well,
just
can your
remember that's what
job
they're
be
talking about.
something else? Can there be a shift? Can your job be something else? Does it have to be
Well,
that?
if you could, you would have already done it if it was all that important. But sure, it can. It can be something else somewhere else. So beat it, right? That's what they're talking about.
Well,
It's
that's not
you
what
know.
I meant, but I take your point. But I
Well,
do
that
think,
is what they're
there
talking
is
about.
this whole conversation about destination management. We saw the
Yeah,
legislature
yeah, yeah. Smackety, smackety, smack.
basically say, HTA, we
Yeah,
don't have confidence in you. We're not funding you. And now the governor coming in with that $200 million
yeah.
fund that he has to rescue that organization. And this whole conversation that we're having around destination management as opposed to destination marketing. I mean, do you feel like all of that is misguided?
No, dude, I'm the guy co-authoring the papers on Your Hero's website on destination management. And I'm here to tell you, as a co-author, what those guys are talking about is nothing like what we were talking about. So, I mean, it's like vaguely, remotely, only in the most bizarre. I mean, I don't even know what those guys are talking about. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to have a conversation about destination management, be happy to do that another time. But it's not what they're talking about, right? My idea is that you could have more tourists and more tourism and more income and more jobs if you managed these spillovers, right? The congestion or the environmental or natural resource degradation or the cultural dilution or whatever people are worried about, right? So those are management problems. But you do that with every industry. That's not unique to tourism, right? You don't let a power plant just belch black smoke over your house. You manage the spillovers. And by the way, most of those spillovers, maybe all of the spillovers, congestion, resource degradation, culture dilution, that's just people driving around in cars and too many people on the trail and whatever's happening to arts and cultural and practitioners and whatever. I mean, we would be doing that anyway if we were Akamai. So destination management is sort of what happens when, well, it's what happens when you have an additional loading in the de facto population and you haven't been managing those problems to begin with: congestion, degradation, dilution. But it's been turned into this thing. Oh yeah, we got to tax the tourists, tax that guy. He made the problem. He the blah on the trail. It's like, what? So
Okay, well,
seriously,
given this data,
yeah,
how do we make up for this? How do we fix this 15% percentage point
yeah,
GDP gap that you've highlighted here for us? How do we get back on that track that we seem to have been on and now are very far away from?
yeah. I don't think we do. I mean, we're done, right? Those guys left. It's over. I mean, we'll stay on the 2% growth path because that's what you get with productivity growth. Basically, you have productivity growth. You have, well, now that's about all that's left. But we used to have labor force growth and population, but people are leaving Hawaii. So what we're the part about the labor force, we just have to see what happens. But human capital expands over time. People invest in skills and whatnot, and so we'll see the potential continue to grow. But closing that gap, yeah, would mean, I don't know, bringing back 50,000 residents and whatever they were doing pre-pandemic. I'm not sure what the number is that we lost because, as I say, we're waiting for the final tally from the Census Bureau, and then DBED will fix up the numbers for us to, the official ones that we'll use after sometime this summer. But that that's what 15% of GDP well, just think of it this way. Hawaii is a $100 billion economy, in round numbers. So 15% is 15 billion. It's not quite that bad because it's 15 billion relative to where we would have been, which is $110 billion economy. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
We would have been, anyway, you get the point. But it's almost the size of tourism. So what's missing is something that's almost as big as tourism is or was pre-pandemic. So it's a big chunk of economic activity. But personally, I don't think we're going to get it back because we're not in that. We don't do that, right? We don't invest in the future in Hawaii. We don't build highways, and we build about a third as many homes as we need in any given year. That's houses. That's like the basic thing, dude. We build speed humps. You know what I mean? Speed humps. Are you serious? So that's enjoy it. That's Hawaii.
Well, we did have Ed Sniffen on here on Friday, and he gave a pretty compelling argument for the speed humps. If anyone wants to go back and watch that, but I don't want to. I don't want to focus in on that. I do want to ask you, though, about the difference in projections between the budget that the governor thought he was going to be working with and the one he got. We did see that the governor, from when the legislature passed their budget, decided that he had to, based on projections, cut $1 billion, 500 million from the rainy day fund that was supposed to go in there, and then various initiatives that lawmakers had laid out. And, when we asked him on this program which of those were difficult decisions, he said none. He said that those were not necessarily ready, that the first responder park was not, shovel ready and needed to be further thought out. He wasn't all that concerned about having to limit what was going into the rainy day fund, given that they are putting $500 million in there. So just interested to hear your thoughts about the difference between what was projected and what was ultimately passed.
Wow. So what's the communication? What's the spin here? It's not shovel ready, so I'm just going to bank the money until what? Until it is? Or do you actually not have the money? Because that's what I heard. I heard a month ago, hey, brother, we get extra money. We got $2 billion. And then all of a sudden it's, oops, what happened to the billion? I mean, I literally went to the mainland for a month. When I left, it was like, we have so much money. We're going to go, okay, fine. And I come back and it's like, oh, we got to cut the budget. We have to cut the budget for the year that hasn't started yet. I'm like, wow, what happened in the last month? So I don't pay attention to these things like I used to, but that's the story I heard. That's what I heard communicated was, we have lots of extra money. No, we don't. And back when people were saying we have lots of extra money, what I saw was, if you do, it's because you were supposed to spend it during the pandemic, but you didn't. And, now you're going to do some stupid stuff with it, which evidently you can't because it's not there. But the last data set I was working with was from the state's municipal bond prospectus almost a year ago, from the fall of last year. And, who knows what happens at the legislature. But what I was hearing, right? I mean, I read the paper, is that we have 2 billion, and then all of a sudden it's, now we're going to cut $1 billion. So yeah, somebody should tell us what that story is. The Council on Revenue must have met last month while I was gone. What did they say? I mean, it could have been a change.
They said it
in
was
the
going to be
forecast.
The projections were lower, and so that money needed to be cut. That's right.
Oh, okay. Well, so there's part of it. But I mean, I thought that before. I never thought they had extra money. I mean, it all seemed like vaporware. I mean, look at the economy, right? The economy just went off the rails. The Hawaii economy went off the rails and is like barely returning to the pre-pandemic trajectory, and is not making up for the loss in between. So how is it you end up with extra tax revenue when the economy went off the rails 5 years ago and then had a pandemic in the middle of that? I've just kind of, I'm shaking my head. But I used to work with those guys, and I don't anymore. So I'm probably not the right person to ask.
I'm hearing basically a mixed bag from you this morning. On the good side, you're telling us, yes, inflation's over and the numbers bear that out. And so we need to stop talking about that. No more grumble about that. The prices are high and they've always been high, and that's just the way it is. On the flip side, it sounds like we're really limited in our economic growth potential, or at least on the tracks that we're on. So given all of those, the factors that you laid out with tourism, with the interest rates, and with that, 15-point gap, should we be worried? Are we heading into a recession? It's the question that everyone always asks.
I actually, personally, I don't think the U.S. is headed into recession, but it's obviously, if the mortgage rate across the country is 7% and it used to be 3%, that's a mean headwind. You see what I mean? There are other countervailing factors. So maybe we should, right? For example, a strong dollar means that imported, components that go into automobile assembly are cheaper than they would have been. But okay, fine. The U.S. is in pretty good shape. It's got a very tight labor market, as does Hawaii, and so it's in a position to withstand cumulatively, right? Because these things unfold over time. Cumulatively, the effect of interest rates already having risen, the Fed has indicated it's very close to, if it hasn't already reached, the point where it stops raising rates, and the longer term rates will, they move the short term rate, the longer term rates will come down as inflation nationwide subsides, albeit more slowly than it already has in Hawaii. And I don't mean to suggest, by the way, that high prices are a problem, but high prices mean don't spend more than you need to, right? So go back to Ross Dress for Less or whatever. I mean, that's what I've been doing, right? Really, the price on Amazon in Hawaii is the same as the price. I don't know about you, but Amazon Prime, I pay the same price as everybody else in the country. So right, you need to avoid the high prices if you can. But what you don't have to avoid anymore is the high inflation, because the inflation rate is 2%. That leaves the real problem of Hawaii having never returned to a path from which it deviated pre-pandemic, took a big hit during the pandemic, and then came out of that with a very tentative recovery and this bizarre discussion about how we're in such good shape, we have $2 billion extra to spend. And I'm like, how is it possible for there to be that much additional state revenue? I mean, you're giving people tax breaks at a moment when the economy has parted from its own trajectory, and we've adjusted the inflation out of that, right? That's really happening in the economy. It's really on a lower path. It's on a path where it would take years to get back to where it was 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. So it's going to take to the mid 2020s for real GDP in Hawaii to get back to where we were in, say, 2017, 2018, right? Forget about the slope for a second. Just look at the level. Man, that's a long time. And while the rest of the country continues to go on down into the future with higher and higher income and higher income per capita, as I say, I think we've done it to ourselves. We've done it, for example, with tourism by having entirely the wrong conversation about it. Your point about destination management, your observation is that people have glommed onto destination management as an excuse to reduce tourism, right? When a lot of people say we need to manage the destination, what they really mean to say is we need fewer tourists. Well, that means fewer jobs and less income. Whereas I was saying, no, we need to manage tourism so that we can have more jobs and more income. And hey, if we can do it virtually, even better. Let's do it in the metaverse. You see what I mean? So the whole point is to export goods and services in the real world or in the metaverse, right? We can do it virtually. And to your question about why don't we do something else? If we could do something else, we already would. And we should be looking for other things we can do. But I'm pretty sure the list that I began to make a second ago, right? We don't do biotechnology in Hawaii anymore. We chase those guys out, right? Genetic modification. We don't build telescopes. That's the throwdown. We're not going to do astronomy in Hawaii anymore. We're going to dismantle the telescopes and shrink STEM industries. Woohoo! That's what's going on in Hawaii. And everything's about dismantle this, shut that down, make it harder to do whatever. So it's very hard for me to see a future other than the one you get. The 2% growth I was talking about as a potential GDP trend, that comes from downloading the latest version of your apps, right? Productivity growth is going on as technology progresses.
Let me
It seems
bring
to me
in.
we ought to at least get that.
Let me bring in, I know we're actually out of time, we're over time, but I want to bring in one question, and also from our audience, because we always like to involve them. And also, I think the next time we have you back, let's focus solely on this tour destination management, because I do think you're absolutely right. Destination management, that term has been become a shorthand for how do we have fewer people in our islands. And Warren Miyake is asking a related question, which is, which organizations can improve tourism marketing to help revenue? So how do we get to the point where, Hawaii wants to be the Maldives, if you will. You want to have people who spend a ton of money and not that many.
Well, my assessment and that of my colleagues, I think it's fair to say, is that we've actually done a pretty good job at tourism destination marketing, right? The sort of generic destination marketing, which, has a private component, of course, but it also needs a collective component, because if you don't have the collective component, the private marketers are not going to have the incentive, right? They're going to have an incentive to market themselves, but not the destination. But, we built an apparatus coming out of the old Visitors Bureau days and the creation of the Tourism Authority 25 years ago. We kind of got that one down. With people's concern about so-called over-tourism, the focus in the research some of us were doing moved from destination marketing to the complementary destination management problem. And, people just sort of run amok in Hawaii now, right? Again, there's a story in the paper today about, drownings. Why? Because people can get to beaches that are on Google Maps that they didn't know how to get to before. So that has to be managed. And the two can't really be, right? They go together, but there's a different kind of, there's a different group of activities that go on in marketing from the ones that go on in management that require economic governance, that require a governance structure in which there's coordination and collaboration and cooperation among agencies. And that seems to be missing. So we've gone from identifying the over-tourism, the spillover problem, to thinking about putting more emphasis in management than marketing, the destination, understanding that they go hand in hand. And now we're kind of stuck with the governance question. Like, does that happen at the cabinet level? Don't we already have a Department of Tourism? It's I call it the silent T at the end of D-bed, right? And then, shouldn't DLNR be doing certain things, and shouldn't, Ed Sniffen and the Highways Division be doing other things? And can't we entertain management tools like congestion pricing, road pricing? Can't you just have me scan a QR, make a timed entry reservation and scan a QR code so that I can get into the state park? Or, so management. And there's an active debate going on that. John D. Fries and the crew at the HTA that's there now had a strong emphasis in the cultural, Native Hawaiian cultural aspects of the destination management challenge. But I think in general, from a more conventional sort of management, managing the crowds or whatever, we haven't really made much progress. And what's missing is leadership and a whole of government approach that gets us there. So that's the quick version. I appreciate the question. It's a good question, and I think that's where we need to take this discussion. There's no reason to throw out. I mean, it's a shame that John DeFries is stepping down, and leadership. Chris Tatum, wasn't he there before? And all these guys that have come through, and Wahini's, whatever. I mean, there's really good people that have been involved in the semi-autonomous agency that we created. But again, there's a governance problem that we haven't solved, and maybe we can learn from, peer experience around the world. It remains an open question.
Okay, well, the next time you're on, that's what we're going to talk about. It's
Well,
six
only,
past the
only if I
hour.
have some answers, because no, I'm serious. We're struggling to find some of those answers.
Well, I love to hear your thought process. It's always so interesting, and you keep it real, and we love that about you. So thank you so much, Economist Paul Brewbaker. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Mahalo, Yunji.
Always great to hear from Paul. If you missed any part of our conversation, you can watch it again on this program after the live stream is over. Catch it later on Channel 50. They rebroadcast several times during the week. And then, of course, you can listen to it as a podcast wherever you get your podcast. Although I would encourage you to take a look at this as a video, just because Paul did bring a lot of data this morning and shared some pretty interesting graphics with us that really illustrates the point that he's trying to make. For a layperson like me, it's really great to speak with him because he really lays out what a lot of the fundamental problems are and why we feel sort of stuck in the place that we're in. I saw some of the comments in there saying, the prices are still high. It still feels really expensive. The prices are high, but the inflation question is asked and answered. And Paul's telling us it's time to go home and stop grumbling about that because that's not an issue for us anymore, which is great news. What is an issue, of course, is economic growth and getting back to the track that we were on, I guess, about 5 years ago, which is pre-pandemic. Let's not forget that. So pandemic is not entirely to blame. In any case, please do watch and share this video. And thanks so much for being part of the conversation. Of course, Paul did talk about the impact of COVID on the economy and all the variants that had an impact on tourism as well. We are going to be speaking with Dr. Tim Brown from the East West Center on Wednesday. He, of course, is an infectious disease expert. He tracks the pandemic across the country and across the globe. He's going to tell us about the variants on the horizon. Is COVID still a factor when it comes to looking at our health and safety? What about long COVID? How does that play into some of the calculations? What do we need to be paying attention to? And what should we stop worrying about? We'll bring that to Dr. Brown on Wednesday, 10:30. We hope to see you then. Aloha.